Alright, I'm taking a little walk at Clark Reservation. Let's see what trees we have here. Here we have hackberry, Celtis occidentalis. Right, we've got those long, warty ridges with the kind of vast, smooth, light gray furrows. This is a very common member of the woods here at Clark Reservation. Here we have a sugar maple. This sugar maple actually gets kind of warty. To me, this sugar maple starts to look a bit like black maple. Sugar maple is Acer saccharum, black maple Acer nigrum, both part of the Sapindaceae, right? And when sugar maple gets this warty or coarse, let's say, I begin to suspect that it's black maple. It's hard to tell the two apart just by the bark. But black maple is some people consider it a variety of sugar maple. It has an affinity for limestone, so it would make sense here. Here we've got a couple of shaggy barked trees. On the right here we've got Ostraya virginiana, eastern hop hornbeam, and you can see these little shaggy ridges peeling and lifting on the left and right of the tree. You can see them starkly against the snow in the background. Ostraya virginiana, eastern hop hornbeam, Betulaceae. This is a common, often upland member of these calcareous forests. On the left here, we've got shagbark hickory, Caria ovata of the Juglandaceae. You can see these huge strips, these huge plates of bark peeling top and bottom. Now, shagbark hickory is going to get much larger than eastern hop hornbeam. They're both typically associated with uplands, but both can also venture down into valleys, and they do consistently. Two bitternut hickories. These are Caria cordiformis, bitternut hickory. There's a lot of large ones in here, interspersed with shagbark hickory. Bitternut is typically associated with nicer sites. It's a little more, prefers a little more to be pampered than shagbark hickory. Shagbark hickory often more upland, often drier and less rich, more infertile sites. They're very easy to tell apart by bark, obviously. Bitternut hickory, also known as smooth bark hickory, doesn't get all exfoliated and shaggy the way shagbark does. Sugar maple. Look at that chalky bark. Never shiny, always chalky and matte. And look in the background, we've got a American basswood, Tilia americana. Look at that bark. Smooth ridges with narrow furrows, very parallel. Look at that truly majestic northern white cedar, arborvitae, Thuya occidentalis. Look at that thin, strippy, light brown bark, very particular to Thuya. And look at those crazy roots. This is likely several hundred years old, very slow-growing, long-lived tree. Often a denizen of wet, calcareous soils. Also likes thin, rich soils on top of bedrock, like we see here. And can be seen, especially in the south, or in its southern range. You'll see it growing right out of cliff faces or out of rocky outcrops. And that kind of fits a lot of the trees here in the upland. Look at that. Crazy. This is a wonderful tree. This is a pretty big cottonwood, Populus deltoides. Must have been one of the first things to come up here, as cottonwood does not like to come up through shade. Very shade intolerant. Look at that large blocky bark. Look at this surprise unwelcome guest. We have a Norway maple, Acer platanoides. We're pretty far into the woods, so it's interesting to see this coming up here. This is pretty nice woods, not a lot of disturbance, but especially not in this part. But as you can see, we have some invaders. Very shade-tolerant tree, slightly more shade-tolerant than sugar maple even, so it can often gain a foothold, even in mature forests. black cherry, Prunus serratina, the rosaceae. Right, we got that black potato chip, or burnt potato chip, burnt cornflake, dragon scale-like bark. We can still see the remnants of lenticels. The lenticels were very distinct and particular in youth. In most cherries, that lenticulate bark persists into maturity, but in black cherry, it is disfigured and torn apart. More sugar maple. Sugar maple has some of the most variable bark in the northeastern forests. Such a common tree, such a relatively easy tree to identify by most characteristics, but a lot of people struggle with the bark for a while. You got some trail markers. This is one of my favorite shagbark hickory individuals. Such gorgeous bark, huge trees, and nice fork at the base. We've descended in elevation, topography has changed, and the ground has gotten moister. Now we see Carpinus caroliniana, or musclewood, blue beech, hornbeam, ironwood. This member of the birch family, the Betulaceae, is very commonly retains its leaves. This is called marcescence. And very often you will find this tree dominating the understory in relatively wet locations in the Northeast. This fluted bark gives it its name, musclewood. Stunning bark of hackberry, Celtis occidentalis. Stunning bark. Here's a mature stem of American basswood, Tilia americana. And then next to it, here's a young stem with hardly any furrows, if any, yet. Completely smooth bark, eventually developing into this ridged and furrowed mature bark, side by side. Here's a wonderful example of eastern hop hornbeam resisting the urge to exfoliate or peel. We have those thin, papery, narrow ridges and shallow, thin furrows, but there is no peeling, there's no exfoliation. These ridges are not lifting from top and bottom as they often do. Don't be fooled by this. Beautiful shagbark. Here, peeking out from all the snow, is that limestone bedrock. This is the parent material at Clark Reservation. This is what gives the soils their calcareous identity and their alkaline quality. That white chalkiness on the ridges of this sugar maple is very distinct. I see this sometimes on sugar maple. Definitely not all the time, but when I do see it, it shouts sugar maple to me. Here's more white chalkiness. I'm not sure what this is. I don't think it's lichen. But to me it's very distinctly a feature of certain sugar maples. Again, not all sugar maples, but when you see it, it can be helpful. It's wild, as the topography shifts here and you go further uphill and you become more well-draining, the understory becomes completely dominated by hop hornbeam. Up there's probably, 9 out of every 10 trees you pass, no exaggeration, is hop hornbeam, Australia. The same thing appears to happen with the shagbark hickory. Just like hop hornbeam, as you go uphill and you start to get those drier soils, shagbark hickory takes over. And just like with hop hornbeam, the majority of the trees you end up passing are shagbark hickory. These 2 large trees, shagbark, 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 shagbark. Crazy. Insane. Every single tree in this shot just about is hop hornbeam. Every single one. It's crazy. Hop hornbeam is usually kind of interspersed with other trees in the understory, but when you get these really dry calcareous soils, this tree just seems to thrive. And I'm not sure why nothing else is coming up here, honestly, but this tree is doing well, pushing through, and really living its, best life? Is that what people say? All hop hornbeam. All these thin stems are hop hornbeam. Earlier I found you a hop hornbeam that was not shaggy, whose ridges were not peeling at all. Here is the opposite end of the spectrum. This hop hornbeam is shaggier and more peeling, more exfoliating than probably any individual I've ever seen. It's like a little miniature shagbark hickory. Look at that tight cross-hatching bark on this bitternut hickory. That is why it's called smooth bark hickory. Look at how wavy and flowy it is. Again, that flowiness to me is quintessentially bitternut hickory. It seems to flow like water rather than be sharp and cross-hatching like ash or tulip tree or black walnut. Flows. Here we've got a black cherry all flaky and corn flaky and burnt. And then over here we've got a cherry that's preserving its bark a lot better. This is Prunus avium, the non-native cherry from Asia and Europe. Look at those lenticels preserved into age. That is something that black cherry does not do. And suddenly, among all of the hop hornbeams, we have this very light-colored, flaky bark. This stem is probably about 8 to 10 inches in diameter. This is chinkapin oak, Quercus muhlenbergii, the Fagaceae. This tree is relatively shade intolerant, likes limestone, often likes dry ridges, and this is kind of the perfect spot for it if it was able to beat all the other trees in the area to the scene. These thin, rich, upland, calcareous soils on limestone bedrock are covered with hop hornbeam, chinkapin oak, sugar maple, both bitternut and shagbark hickory, tilia, or American basswood, black cherry, Prunus serotina,